Right, they look completely different. Let's get these. Oh, they absolutely reek. I'd be very surprised if any of these seeds have survived. Oh, they're like old socks or something. It's like a compost. It's like that real sort of rotting vegetation. Right, okay. So I'll pour them in here. Ugh. 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 Oh, good Lord. Smell that. That is vile. Plant these quickly. Ugh.
My hunch is the ones that smell the worst have been destroyed by the salt. Perhaps a few of the less pungent have survived.
Right, okay. Tomatoes. Oh, they're all congealed together. Let's see what these guys are like. Actually, they're not so bad. That's all right. Let's grab some of these with the tweezers. And finally, get to plant the seeds. Right, let's pour the last of that away. Okay, I'll put these on here. And we'll see if they germinate.
I can feel Darwin's excitement about the experiment in a letter he sends to Hooker. All I want to show is the possibility of a few plants being transported by currents. And by Jove, I will. Darwin doesn't rely on his experiment alone. He writes dozens of letters to seafarers and shipwrecked sailors to gather valuable information about plants in remote corners of the world. So I've decided to visit Southwest Ireland to find out more about how plant seeds travel from marine biologist Dan Minchin.
And we're here today on this beach in Ireland to find evidence to support Darwin's idea.
Yes, we look along the strand line because it's storms that come in from the open sea here.
Yeah.
And well, even on a day like today, it's not a storm, but there's a reasonably brisk wind blowing in. And anything on the surface could be blown up to the high water mark where all the floating weed and everything collects. And that's the place to look.
So all this stuff along here potentially all has seeds in.
There are some places that you can look in which are more likely to have seeds than others.
Basically, it's sea compost, isn't it?
There's a bit of drift fishing line that's come in here.
And the seeds will be attached to that, will they? Or?
No. You'd find them, it's nice and light, you see, but you'd find them at much the same kind of level on the shore. Just yesterday now, I found this seed here. This is a horse's eye bean. It's actually one of the ones that interested Darwin. And the coat of that, it's thick as the leather on your boot, you know?
That is, isn't it?
And you wouldn't be able to crack that open with your teeth.
At sea, the tough covering of the horse's eye bean keeps salt water out. But once on land, if the coat is damaged, fresh water can enter. Then the seed swells up, bursts its coat and grows, just as Darwin predicts.
As long as it only happens occasionally, then that's enough for him to prove his argument.
It's a tough assignment for a seed, because the great majority of them will not be able to develop.
But it's not impossible. Along the coast, Dan Minchin has tracked down a remarkable flower. The seeds of this plant, the sea pea, have floated all the way across the Atlantic. Darwin would have been delighted to have known of these immigrants.
These are really quite special because it's the only area in Ireland where I think they exist. And the parents of these particular plants are in North America, and their young are here. This is the seed pod here, okay?
Oh, you can see where it gets its name from, the CP.
You can, yeah, absolutely. And they produce this root system, and from this root system you have all of these plants.
What an epic journey. From a seed entering the ocean in North America,
Yes.
being washed all the way across the ocean, and then arrive on the beach here, get blown up, favourable conditions. It germinates, the seed germinates and grows into this plant here. It completes the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the only way Darwin can prove that plants have the potential to cross oceans is with his experiment. If his seeds survive the salt water, they can get on land and grow. Now's the moment to see how my seeds have got on. I wonder if their coatings have successfully kept the salt out.
Quite dramatic, really. We've only had 3 of these 6 plants germinate, so it's all or nothing, really. And it's a no-show on the peas. Let's go through this systematically. Right, okay. So first up, tomato. Yeah, that's a germinate. So that's a tick.
The tomato, onion and cress seeds survived. The other 3 failed. A success rate broadly similar to Darwin's. We've proved that some seeds can indeed make it through a whole month in salt water. A small-scale experiment with worldwide implications.
6 plants were enough for me, but Darwin seems to get carried away with this one because he studies 87 different types and then goes on to do even more experiments along the same lines.
He does so many experiments because he's convinced that travel is a key driving force of evolution. When younger, Darwin sailed to South America and the Galapagos Islands, 600 miles out in the Pacific. There he saw animals and plants perfectly suited to the environment of each island. But there's something else. These animals and plants were noticeably different from their relatives on the mainland. Land reptiles like the iguana have become marine living in the Galapagos. Darwin collected everything, including many small finches. But it isn't until he's back in England that he understands the full implications. One finch, the cactus finch, feeds on the prickly pear cactus. Another, the ground finch, has a thick beak for cracking seeds. While the woodpecker finch teases insects out of holes. Darwin comes to believe that all these different finches with different talents are descended from a single species, a small group of finches that must have been blown out to the Galapagos from South America long before. Over time, this one type of bird had evolved into many different species. But of course, Darwin being Darwin, he wants to know how had the finches done this? How did they develop new beaks? How could the birds pass on their new characteristics? Back in England, these questions preoccupy Darwin. But studying specimens from the Galapagos won't provide the full answer.
So Charles Darwin does something extraordinary. This gentleman scientist leaves his respectable life of the country squire and makes his way deep into the slums of South London. He starts hanging around the pubs and the clubs, chatting to the locals. He thinks that they may know something of importance.